Hello YouTube, my name is Nero and today we have some Call of Duty Black Ops 3 playing a bit of Fracture here on the map Nuketown. This is one of the better gameplays I've gotten recently. I hope you guys will sit back, relax, and enjoy it because there's lots of kills, lots of fun, lots of scoring. It's a very entertaining gameplay as a whole in my opinion, so I hope you guys will enjoy it. Today I want to talk to you guys about stats in the Call of Duty franchise and just stats in video games as a whole because they do matter. Sort of. They kind of matter. They're not the end-all be-all of video games, but they definitely have their own inherent value. I'm not here to say that stats are the all-important thing in Call of Duty. I'm not here to say that anybody below a certain statistical threshold is a bad player. I'm not here to say anybody above a certain threshold is a good player. I'm just here to make the argument that stats do matter because they are an indicator of how you like to play the game, and you can learn a lot by looking at somebody's stats. But, of course, it doesn't actually tell you exactly how good they are, how bad they are, but you can still learn a lot about a person by looking at their stats on a game like Call of Duty. It's a never-ending argument. This has been happening since as long as I've been in the Call of Duty community. And I've been around for absolutely ages, guys. Ever since Call of Duty 4, people have been arguing back and forth. There's people that say stats don't matter, and if you have good stats and you're a tryhard, or you're a camper, or you're a no-life, or a friendless loser whose sole purpose is to be good at Call of Duty, or if you have really bad stats and you're a terrible player, why are you playing this game? You're a BK random, you're awful. Neither group in this argument is right, but stats do matter in some respect in a competitive game like Call of Duty. Some may think that they actually matter more than they really do, but they still do matter. I mean, maintaining a good kill-death ratio along with a good win-loss ratio is going to indicate that you're probably a pretty good player. At least you're going to be above average. Now, let's look at some different types of players in the Call of Duty franchise. We can kind of determine whether or not that person's going to be good or not. So, if somebody has a 2 KD, but they have a really negative win-loss ratio, that means that they're very good at getting kills, but they don't play the objective whatsoever, and in my eyes, that makes you worse than if you had a low KD and a good win-loss. Like, for me, it's always about winning, right? If you're not trying to win the game, then what's the point? If you're just, camping for your own kills, if you're just trying to have a high kill-death ratio, but you don't really care whether or not you win, it's like, well, what's the point? Because the objective is, the context of every Call of Duty match is you're supposed to try to win the match, and if you're not doing that, in my opinion, you're not playing the game right. So, if you have somebody that has like a 2 or a 3 KD, but their win-loss is like a 0.5, then to me, it's like, that guy just, your KD doesn't mean anything to me, bro, because I know you camp really hard to get that, and you're not trying for the objective. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're a 1 KD or less player, but you maintain a good win-loss ratio, perhaps something like over a 2.0, that says to me that you're actually a pretty awesome player. You're somebody who plays the objective very hard, but maybe you're not the best player yet. Maybe you're not that great on the stick, which is why, your KD is like a 1 or less, like you're still kind of negative, but you're trying really hard to win, and that's what matters in my opinion. I was that player. When I first started playing COD back in Call of Duty 4 back in 07, my KD, I remember specifically because it was, good numbers, like 0.77, right? 7 just a number that sticks in my head, so I remembered it specifically because that was also my number in high school. So I had a 0.77 KD, and my win-loss was a 1.5, which was pretty above average, right? So my KD was bad because I wasn't a very good player, but I was trying to win really hard all the time, so I had a positive win-loss ratio. And that, of course, tanked because, back in Call of Duty 4, as well as World of War, if you guys don't know, Search and Destroy killed your win-loss ratio because every round in Search and Destroy counted as a win or a loss. Can you guys imagine that in Black Ops 3? What would your win-loss be like if every single round of Search and Destroy was a win or a loss? Like, if you won 4-3, that's 4 wins on your record and 3 losses on your record. So that tanked my stats pretty quickly. But when I first started playing COD 4, I would play mainly Ground War. And so my KD was a 0.77 and a 1.5 win-loss. I tried my best to try and win. If you're somebody who hovers at about a 1.0 KD and a 1.0 win-loss, you're probably just a good player. You're probably just an average player to above average. You're good, right? You're fine. You're doing great. You're getting more kills than you do deaths, and you're winning more games than you lose. So you're pretty above average. You can look at all different stats that you want, but ultimately it comes down to, are you going to try to win the game for me? Another stat that we could look at would be score per minute, although I really don't like score per minute as a statistic. They added in, when did they add that in? Was it the original Black Ops? I think it was the original Black Ops when they started ranking the leaderboards by your score per minute, and I did not like that because it really didn't tell you how good of a player that person actually was. And the idea was they wanted it to be actually how good you are as compared to previously when it was just how much time you put into the game. That's what leaderboards traditionally are, but score per minute is also flawed because if you're looking at somebody's overall score per minute, that more or less just indicates what kind of game modes they like to play. If you're somebody that likes to play Team Deathmatch, Free-for-all, or Search and Destroy, you're going to have a lot lower score per minute than most other players because you don't get a lot of score in those particular game modes. Whereas if you're like me, you play a lot of ground war, you play a lot of domination, you play a lot of fracture, you're going to have a pretty high score per minute compared to those other players. And even if you're somebody like of an equal skill level, right? So let's say I have 300 games of domination played, but you have 25 games, and we're of an equal skill level, you're going to have a much higher score per minute on the leaderboards because you've had less room for error, right? I have 300 games played. There's a lot of room in there for me to mess up and for me to have a bad game, whereas you've had 25 games. And if you just do pretty well in those 25 games, your score per minute is going to skyrocket. So I never liked these score per minute leaderboards. I always thought that they were flawed in that respect. I prefer the old school leaderboards, which I understand are purely representative of your time played, but still, I like it better that way. Sure, it would encourage you no-lifing a game or no-lifing a particular mode, but at least it was balanced to an extent, whereas the score per minute system can just be so flawed in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of it. There's just too many variables there. Like, what's to even say what a good score per minute even is? You know, again, if you see somebody that's like really good, right? Somebody's got 500 games played, but he has like a 600 score per minute. It's like, okay, so that guy's a monster. But for the most part, score per minute doesn't really teach you too much about a player. That's why I like looking at people's kill-death ratios and their win-loss ratios and just seeing, are they trying to win the match, and while they're trying to win, do they typically do relatively well while trying to win the match? That's what it comes down to for me. I mean, the bottom line of this video, guys, is stats do matter in video games. They're very telling of what kind of a player you are. I like that aspect of it, man. People with a super high win-loss ratio typically means they're going to be a good player, but if it's super, super high, then that may just mean they're playing with a full party all the time, right? So back in Modern Warfare 3, I hit 10th Prestige with a 17.0 win-loss ratio, which was ridiculously high. And I was actually mad that it was a 17.0 because it should have been higher than that. The majority of my losses came from dashboarders and host disconnections and stuff like that. The reason why it was so high is I did not play Modern Warfare 3 unless I had a full party. So my win-loss ratio was absolutely insane. My KD was fine. I don't even remember what it was, like 1 point something, like 1.7 maybe. I don't even know. But maybe it was a 2. I can't even remember. But my win-loss was high because I played the party. So win-loss ratio is not the end-all be-all. It can be high, but if it's really high, that means you probably play with a party all the time. So that kind of messes with you a little bit. But there's also people that have a super low win-loss ratio. That means they don't play the objective whatsoever, or they get matched up with really bad teammates. But I honestly don't buy that excuse. Like, so many people say, oh, my win-loss is bad because my teammates always suck. I never get matched up with good people. It's always my team that lets me down. But I've played the past 2 Call of Duty games basically solo, whereas back in Modern Warfare 3, I always played the full party. Most of those people have moved on. I've talked about that a number of times on Dear Nero, and as a result, I mainly play Call of Duty solo now through Advanced Warfare and through Black Ops 3. I'd estimate probably 80% of my game time has been solo over these past 2 games, and I've still been able to maintain above a 2.0 win-loss ratio in both of them because I try to win every single game that I play. That's just what kind of a player that I am. I see too often people just chalking up like a good kill-death ratio to somebody being a camper, right? I get that so much. Like, if you see somebody do relatively good, if you hear him in voice chat, oh, look at this guy's out there camping. He's got a good KD. He's a camper, and I hate that, man. It's like, what is this, 2008? You could be good at Call of Duty while still moving around. Just because somebody has good stats doesn't mean they're a camper. But believe it or not, you can actually maintain a good kill-death ratio without camping in corners. And honestly, though, the people that do that, the people that camp in corners or hide in buildings, they will get wrecked by a good rusher, especially in the more recent Call of Duty games. You think of Advanced Warfare, you think of Black Ops 3, with the movement available in those games, the fact that we can get into a second-story window without having to climb a ladder or climb stairs or anything like that. The fact that we can run on walls and double jump and all kinds of things like that. Like, every single year, they find new ways to punish campers in Call of Duty. So if you see somebody with a good KD, don't just say, oh, well, that guy's a camper. That's not necessarily true. The same can be said for people with low KDs. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad player or that they're never going to be good at the game. It may just mean they're new to the series, right? Perhaps they've been playing for a while, but maybe they play very casually or very infrequently. I have relatives of mine that are like that. Like, they don't play Call of Duty a whole lot. Like, they used to play a lot back in the day, but life kind of came first, and so they very rarely play Call of Duty anymore. And when they do, they're typically not great. They have their moments, but they're okay. You know, that ends up happening a lot. Or perhaps maybe they're playing with a certain gimmick, whether it's sniping or knifing or anything like that. But even then, you can still make the argument that stats matter because you get to learn that they're that kind of a player just by simply looking at their stats, which is what I like the most about combat records and statistics in video games as a whole. I mean, all ultimately, we're talking about video games here, right? So it's not life or death whether or not your stats are good, but I'm just saying I feel as though stats do matter because, again, they're an indicator of what kind of a player that you are. So the quote, the great Wings of Redemption, he said, everybody is good at driving and everybody is good at Call of Duty. Or at least that was a paraphrase. I think I got it pretty close to right. And that's a great quote because you'll never hear somebody say, I'm terrible at driving. You'll never hear somebody say they're terrible at Call of Duty. And I think people hate when people focus on stats because maybe they think they're a great Call of Duty player, even though their stats don't really indicate that. Well, maybe they're not as great as you thought. You know, I look at my stats in Halo or I look at my stats in Gears of War and they're awful. They're terrible. I don't have this illusion that I'm good at Halo or Gears of War. I'm pretty awful at the game and my stats represent that. But remember, there's always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. And any game where you can measure yourself, you can always get better at it, right? And that's why I like stats, because you can measure yourself and you can improve, or just look at what kind of a player that you are. Remember I said in Call of Duty 4 that my KD was a .77 when I first started playing? I wanted to get better, so I kept playing. I kept learning. I kept trying to get better. In every match, I tried to learn and improve, and eventually I brought my KD up to a 1.0, and now I'm like positive 40,000 or something like that. Like my KD is still like a 1.3, but I still have a really positive KD. Like I have 40,000 more kills than I did deaths, when at one point I was negative, and that's because I wanted to improve, and that's how I personally like to have fun playing video games. I like competing. I like trying to improve. I like to learn. I like to try to win. I get so bored so quickly, guys, bored to tears if I'm playing a game and it feels like I'm not working towards anything, if it feels like nothing I'm doing actually matters. If I'm playing a private match against bots, that is much more boring than actually playing the actual multiplayer against people, because my stats don't matter in private match. I know I'm not facing people. Just, it doesn't matter, and it's boring to me. So when I actually play the online multiplayer, it's much different. It actually matters, and therefore I'm interested. That's how I personally am. And I get that not everybody is like that. Some people like to play the game casually. Some people like to play Call of Duty by messing around with their friends and running around with really weird setups, and that's perfectly fine. I'm just saying that stats do matter, at least to some extent, because they will always be an indicator of how you like to play the game. Again, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, I'm not here to say that if you're below a certain threshold, then you're a bad player, or that if you're above a certain threshold, you're a good player. There's too many variables for that to honestly be true. I gave plenty of examples of different kinds of players that I run into frequently in Call of Duty, and I gave my opinions on those people, but those are just my opinions, really. I can't make the decision. I can't be the determining factor of that's a good player or that's a bad player, because it's different, man. The stats, they tell you a lot about a person, but it doesn't tell you the entire story, right? So that's why stats matter. They kind of matter because they kind of give you an idea of what that player is going to be like, how they like to play the game, and exactly how good they may be at the game. But again, it's not entirely accurate. That's why they only kind of matter. They're not the end-all be-all of video games. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. I hope you guys all found it helpful and informative. Those are just my thoughts on stats in Call of Duty and in video games as a whole. I think about this quite often when I'm playing Call of Duty by myself. I look at my own combat record. I look at the combat record of other people in the lobby, and I make these assumptions on these players, and typically those assumptions are correct. Just by looking at their stats, like, okay, so this guy, most of his kills are with a sniper, and he's got a negative kill-death ratio with a negative win-loss ratio. So this guy is just going to try running into my spawn trying to hit a clip for montages, and lo and behold, that's what that guy does the entire game. This person's got a pretty good win-loss ratio, but his KD's on the lower side, so he's probably going to be all over the flags that game. Then you look at the end of the game and say, yep, that guy had a lot of captures and a lot of defense, but not a whole lot of kills and a pretty good amount of deaths. Like, you can just make these assumptions on people based on their stats, and whether or not they're good or bad, that's completely up for debate. That's completely subjective. I'm just here to say stats matter. Kind of, in Call of Duty. But once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you guys all found it helpful and informative. Hopefully you guys don't get too angry at stuff like this, because I know people get super upset when you say stats matter. I can imagine this video is going to have more dislikes than my normal videos, because if you make a video saying stats matter, then people are like, no, they don't, dislike, you know, because that's just what people do on YouTube. They comment or they like and dislike based upon the title of the video or maybe the thumbnail without ever actually watching the whole thing. But if you got this far into the video, I think you guys get my point. It's that stats matter. Kind of, which is the exact title of the video. So that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please drop me a rating and let me know in the comments what you guys think. What do you guys think about stats in video games? Just give me your thoughts. I'd love to hear about that. Once again, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Drop me a rating. Hope you guys all have a wonderful day.